Stop. Before we start, I need you to understand something. Everything you were taught about the British Empire, the exploration, the adventure, the civilizing mission, the maps going pink, it's not wrong exactly. It's just missing something rather important. The British Empire was not built on exploration, not built on innovation, not built on the famous British spirit of fair play. It was built on addiction, deliberately, systematically, brilliantly, and with a brutality that most British history books still struggle to look at directly. 3 times in 3 different centuries on 3 different continents, Britain found a substance that human beings couldn't stop consuming, and built an empire around controlling the supply. Substance 1, tobacco, a weed grown in a Virginia swamp by enslaved people. That turned Britain into a colonial superpower. Substance 2, cotton, white fibers picked by 4 million enslaved Americans. That industrialized an entire planet. Substance 3, opium, a drug deliberately pumped into China against Chinese law by the British government. That built the financial foundations of modern Britain and created the tensions you read about in today's headlines. This wasn't accidental. It wasn't a side effect of empire. It wasn't unfortunate collateral damage. It was the point. Same logic every time. Find something addictive. Control the supply. Use force to keep control. Use the cheapest possible labor. Extract the maximum possible profit. 3 substances, 3 continents, 1 playbook. But before we get into tobacco, I need to tell you about one decision. Made in Virginia, 6661. That didn't just shape America. It created the legal foundation for the most brutal labor system in human history. And it happened directly because of tobacco. Hold that thought. Because first, you need to understand the disaster that started everything. Jamestown, Virginia, 1610, Britain's first permanent settlement in North America. And it is an absolute catastrophe. The colonists are starving. They've eaten their horses, their dogs, rats, snakes, boot leather. One man is executed for eating his own wife. This is in the actual historical record. This period is called officially the starving time. Of 500 colonists who arrived, fewer than 60 are still alive. The Virginia Company, the private British corporation that funded the expedition, is hemorrhaging money. London is losing patience. The whole thing looks like a catastrophic waste. And then a man named John Rolfe turns up. Rolfe does 2 things that change the world. He marries Pocahontas, and he plants tobacco. Specifically, he smuggles seeds of a superior Spanish tobacco variety out of the Caribbean. The Spanish had a complete monopoly on this strain. Taking those seeds was corporate espionage, the 1610 equivalent of stealing a competitor's source code. He plants them in Virginia soil. They thrive. By 1614, Rolfe ships the first commercial tobacco harvest to England, and England goes absolutely mental for it. Here are the numbers. 1603, England imports 25,000 pounds of tobacco, total, whole year. By 1640, tobacco is London's #1 import. By 1700, 38 million pounds a year. By 1771, 100 million pounds per year of an addictive drug grown on stolen land by enslaved people, shipped to a country where the king himself called it, quoting directly, a heathenish poison. King James I wrote an entire pamphlet condemning tobacco in 1604, called it loathsome to the eye, hateful to the nose, harmful to the brain, dangerous to the lungs, then taxed it 4,000% and kept the revenue. Absolutely classic. Strip away the colonial romance. What was tobacco really? The world's first mass-market addictive product. People couldn't stop buying it. The money never stopped flowing. A product that created its own demand. The more people smoked, the more they needed to smoke. And that product needed workers. Lots of them, permanently, cheaply. Which brings us to the decision I mentioned at the start. The one made in Virginia in 1661. Growing tobacco is extraordinarily labor-intensive. Every plant individually tended. Insects removed by hand from every leaf. Harvested, cured, packed. In the early years, done by indentured servants. people working 5 to 7 years in exchange for passage to America. But here's the problem with indentured servants. Their contract expires. After 7 years, they're free, can buy land, grow tobacco themselves, become competitors. The plantation owners needed a workforce that couldn't leave. In 1661, Virginia formally institutionalized race-based hereditary slavery. There it is, the decision I told you about. Not because slavery was new, because tobacco made permanent slavery economically necessary. The crop that saved Jamestown, built on the legal architecture for chattel slavery. Karl Marx said in 1846, without slavery, no cotton. Without cotton, no modern industry. He could have added, without tobacco, no cotton. Because tobacco came first. Tobacco taught British colonists that addiction was a business model. Get people hooked, keep costs low, use human beings as property. That lesson, learned in Virginia in the 1660s, echoes through everything that follows. One more thing about tobacco. This one genuinely surprises people. The founding fathers of America, the men who wrote the Declaration of Independence, who built the Republic, many of them were tobacco planters. George Washington, tobacco planter. Thomas Jefferson, tobacco planter. Both deeply in debt to British tobacco merchants by the time of the Revolution. Virginia planters sold tobacco through London middlemen called factors. The factors sold the tobacco, sent back British goods on credit. The credit piled up. By the 1760s, Washington and Jefferson both owed enormous sums they couldn't pay. And when those debts became unpayable, when British merchants started demanding settlement, a curious thing happened. The tobacco planters became the most vocal revolutionaries. I'm not saying the American Revolution was caused by debt, but when you follow the tobacco money, from Virginia fields to London counting houses to the pockets of men who wrote all men are created equal, the picture gets complicated. The crop that built America also helped break it from Britain, grown by people who were never free at all. Now, everything I've just told you about tobacco, cotton makes it look small. Cotton didn't just build one country. Cotton industrialized the entire planet. But here's the question I'll answer when we get there. Britain abolished the slave trade in 1807, abolished slavery in its own colonies in 1833. So how do you simultaneously hold the moral credibility of abolition and keep profiting from slave labor? The answer Britain found is one of the most cynical things in commercial history. Cotton. Coming up. If you're watching this thinking, I genuinely never knew any of this, hit the like button. This is exactly the kind of history that gets buried. Right, cotton. Let me show you how fast this thing moved. Cotton is the hinge of history. Not an exaggeration. Let me prove it. 1787, year the American Constitution is written. Almost zero cotton grown commercially in the United States. Zero. 1860. Just 73 years later, cotton accounts for 61% of all American exports, 61% of the most productive economy on Earth. From one crop in 73 years. That is the fastest economic transformation in human history up to that point. Britain? By 1860, cotton textiles are nearly 40% of all British exports. 4 million people, 1/6 of the entire English population, dependent on cotton. Manchester, which barely existed before cotton, becomes Cottonopolis, the most concentrated industrial city in the world, built entirely on one crop, and 75% of the cotton feeding those mills, American South, picked by enslaved people. Here is the answer to the question I planted at the end of tobacco. How does Britain claim moral credibility for abolition while continuing to profit from slave labor? Here's how. British merchants financed cotton plantations in the American South. Enslaved Africans, kidnapped, transported across the Atlantic in conditions of unimaginable horror, forced to plant and harvest the cotton. Raw cotton ships from New Orleans to Liverpool, often in the same ships that brought enslaved people west. In Manchester and Leeds, cotton spun and woven in factories by workers, including children. Textiles sold around the world. Profits flow to British investors, British merchants, British banks. Britain abolished the slave trade in 1807, abolished slavery in its own colonies in 1833. And then, British cotton mills continued buying slave-grown cotton from America until 1865. So Britain had the moral credibility of abolition and the economic benefit of continuing to profit from slavery. At one remove, one historian put it simply, slaves picked 80% of the cotton spun in British mills. While the British state interdicted slave ships, its merchants profited at one remove. The British government could say, we don't own slaves. Technically true, but the machine making Britain the most powerful industrial nation on Earth? Running on enslaved labor, just from a distance. That distance was called the Atlantic Ocean. Eli Whitney, 1793, invents the cotton gin, separates cotton seeds from fibers 50 times faster than a human being. Everyone learns about Eli Whitney in school. What nobody tells you is what the gin actually did. Conventional wisdom made cotton easier, should have reduced the need for enslaved labor. The exact opposite happened. Faster processing meant you needed vastly more raw cotton, which meant more field workers, which meant more enslaved people. 1790, before the gin, 700,000 enslaved people in the United States. 1860, after the gin, 4 million. A machine designed to make work easier made slavery bigger by a factor of almost 6 in 70 years. Wild. 1861, American Civil War begins. Union blockades Confederate ports. Cotton stops flowing to Britain. Lancashire catastrophic. Mills shut overnight. Hundreds of thousands thrown out of work. Families starving. 500,000 people on poor relief by 1862. Those workers, suffering because cotton stopped, know exactly why. America is fighting a war over slavery. British industrialists are lobbying to recognize the Confederacy, to break the blockade, to side with slavery. But the workers of Lancashire, actually starving, hold mass meetings and vote overwhelmingly to support the Union, to support the end of slavery, even though it was costing them their livelihoods. The mill workers chose principle over self-interest, while the mill owners lobbied for the opposite. That contrast tells you everything about who built the cotton economy and who profited from it. Tobacco, cotton, two substances, two continents, two systems of exploitation. But we haven't got to the darkest one yet, because what Britain did with opium is so brazen, so calculated, so deliberately criminal, that even British history books today struggle to look at it directly. One Chinese official wrote directly to Queen Victoria, calmly, logically, devastatingly, pointing out that Britain was doing something monstrous. Queen Victoria did not reply. Instead, Britain sent warships. That story starts brilliantly, absurdly, with a cup of tea. Drop a comment right now. What was new to you? Tobacco? Cotton? The Lancashire workers? Subscribe if you haven't, because what's coming genuinely shocked me when I first researched it. Opium. Here we go. To understand the opium trade, you need to understand one problem driving Britain absolutely mad in the early 1800s. Tea. Britain had become addicted to tea, not metaphorically, literally. By the early 1800s, British people at every level of society consumed vast quantities of Chinese tea. The problem? China didn't want anything Britain made. Self-sufficient, its own silk, its own porcelain, its own everything. British goods? Zero interest. So Britain was paying for tea in silver, and the silver was running out. Trade deficit with China close to £4 million a year. At the exact moment Britain was fighting the Napoleonic Wars, the East India Company, the most powerful corporation in history, faced a simple problem. How do you sell something to people who don't want anything you have? The answer they found is one of the most cynical acts in commercial history. You find something they'll become addicted to, and make sure they can't get it from anyone else. Here is how the British opium machine worked. Britain controls Bengal, northern India, perfect for opium poppies. East India Company establishes a complete monopoly on opium cultivation. Forces Indian farmers to grow poppies, pays them almost nothing. Raw opium processed in company factories, auctioned in Calcutta to private merchants. Merchants sail to China, transfer to Chinese smugglers who distribute inland. Chinese pay in silver. Silver goes to Britain. Britain buys tea. Cycle continues. 1729, 200 chests of opium entering China per year. 1838, 40,000 chests per year. 5.6 million pounds of opium per year, deliberately pumped into a country that had declared it illegal, the largest state-sponsored drug trafficking operation in human history. And they knew it. One Chinese official, Commissioner Lindsix, wrote directly to Queen Victoria, pointed out calmly that opium was illegal in Britain itself. Asked simply, how can you claim to be moral while selling in our country a drug you forbid in your own? Queen Victoria did not reply. By the 1830s, 1 in 10 Chinese people were using opium. 1 in 10, in a population of hundreds of millions. Government officials addicted, soldiers addicted, merchants addicted. China being drained of financial reserves to pay for a drug destroying its population. 1839, the emperor had had enough. He appointed Lin Zexu as special commissioner. One task, end the opium trade. Lin Zexu seized over 20,000 chests of British opium, roughly 1,400 tons, and destroyed every last bit of it. The British response was not diplomatic. Think about what just happened. China destroyed drugs being illegally smuggled into its country. And Britain declared war. Actually declared war. Sent the Royal Navy, bombarded Chinese ports, killed thousands of people. To protect its right to sell drugs, the Treaty of Nanking, 1842. China forced to pay Britain $21 million in reparations for opium China had legally destroyed. Open 5 new ports to British merchants. Grant British citizens immunity from Chinese law, and cede Hong Kong Island to Britain permanently. Britain won Hong Kong as the prize for winning a war it started to protect its drug trade. The Second Opium War, 1856 to 1860, made things worse. Britain and France burned the Chinese emperor's summer palace to the ground, forced China to legally allow opium, to write it into Chinese law as a permitted import. The lesson Chinese students learn about the Opium Wars today: China should never again let itself become weak and vulnerable. That lesson, from British warships in 1842, is a direct line to how China behaves today. Towards the West, towards Hong Kong, towards anyone threatening its sovereignty, the Opium Wars ended in 1860. Their consequences have not. 3 substances: tobacco, cotton, opium. 3 continents: Africa, America, Asia. 3 centuries, 1 logic: find something addictive, control the supply, use force to keep control, use the cheapest possible labor, extract the maximum profit. And in every case, when people tried to resist, Britain used military force. Virginia workers who wanted freedom, legal slavery. Indian farmers who refused to grow poppies, taxation and famine. Chinese officials who destroyed illegal drugs, warships. The British Empire was, at its core, an enforcement mechanism for a business model based on addiction and exploitation. The wealth generated by tobacco, cotton, and opium didn't disappear. It was invested in railways, factories, banks, universities, in the infrastructure of the modern world. When people ask, why is Britain wealthy? Why is the West dominant? Part of the honest answer is tobacco, cotton, opium, built on enslaved labor, built on military coercion, built on addiction. You cannot separate the prosperity from the method. They are the same thing. And in China, where children learn the Opium Wars were the beginning of a century of humiliation, the memory of what Britain did with those warships has never faded. It is not history to them. It is the explanation for everything. 3 substances, 1 empire, 1 logic. History is not something that happened a long time ago. It is the ground you are standing on. If this video changed how you see the world, share it, subscribe, hit the bell, drop a comment, tell me what shocked you most. Next video: how Britain accidentally invented the entire global financial system while trying to fund a war it had no business starting. You're not ready for it. Cheers.